Welcome to our webinar. Our webinar today is called Autism, What is it? And what treatments are effective? We have Spanish interpretation available for those who want it. And this is a webinar instead of a meeting. So if you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, your Zoom hand, by clicking on the button that says raise hand. Or you can type your question in the box that says Q&A. And I'd like to suggest that we stop periodically to look for questions as we go. And then we can also take questions at the end. So this webinar is brought to you today by the Family Focus Resource Center and also representatives from Captain. So I will tell you a little bit about the Family Focus Resource Center. We are a nonprofit organization that is funded through the California Department of Education and also the Department of Developmental Services. And we are here to help families with providing resources, educational workshops like this, and support groups. And our staff are all made up of parents of children with disabilities. That includes myself. I'm the parent of 2 young men who have autism. And so it's a very important topic to me, and we're happy to talk to you about it today. We have offices in the San Fernando Valley and in Santa Clarita Valley, and also in Lancaster in the Antelope Valley. So if you want to contact us to, talk about local resources or find out about local events or other workshops like this, please contact our office. We'll send an email out to everyone who registered today with all of our contact information. We also have monthly IEP training. We have some special events coming up. We're actually starting to do in-person events again, so that's kind of exciting. And a lot of good information coming up. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And now I'm going to hand it over to Monica, who's going to tell you about Captain.
So hi, my name is Monica Gillis, and I am the program specialist at the Antelope Valley SELPA, and our office is in Palmdale. And what we do is we work with 10 school districts here in the Antelope Valley. But one of the special things about my job is that I work very closely with a network of professionals, and we call ourselves Captain. So, and it's an acronym that stands for California Autism Professional Trainers and Information Network. So we have lots of wonderfully skilled educators, family support providers, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, social workers. We have a whole bunch of people throughout the entire state of California that makes up this network. And we all work together collaboratively from different agencies, which is what really makes this group so special. And so it's this multi-agency network, and it was developed about 10, 12 years ago so that we can help those living in California, especially our educators and family support providers and families, and direct them to evidence-based practices. And evidence-based practices is basically strategies and tools that we use to work with students with autism that has a lot of research behind it, right? And so our mission is to make sure that everyone is aware of these tools and where to find all of these resources. So again, we don't just work with schools, we work with the family support agencies, we work with regional center, we work with parents, with universities. It's a very large network of professionals. And so specifically, we are doing whatever we can to help individuals who have autism spectrum disorders across the entire state of California.
Thank you, Monica.
And so, as I said, we have a lot of great goals, and we've been really working hard to work with several universities and research institutions to really figure out what works. So if we were to just simply do a quick search on Google and try to figure out what should we be doing with our students with autism, you would find so many different things. And a lot of those things don't have a lot of evidence or research to back it. So what this network did was, this Captain network did, is they started working with institutions across the United States, university and research institutions, and they started collecting data about different evidence-based practices. So when you see that EBP on the screen there, that's just an acronym for evidence-based practice. Okay. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that all of us increase our knowledge about autism spectrum disorders, right? So we all learn about what that is, what needs to happen, how do we best work with our students and children with autism. And we also want to make sure everyone knows what the evidence-based practices are. And we want to make sure we're disseminating, we're getting this information out to everyone, which is why we're doing this presentation. But we also do lots of presentations for other organizations as well, trying to get all of this information into the right hands. Our next really big goal is to work with all of our schools somehow. And so I believe that every single one of our CELPAs is now involved with Captain in some capacity. And so what we're really trying to do is, we've got all of these great resources, and we know what evidence-based practices are. We know all the 29 practices that work in the classrooms, right? There's the research that supports it. But we also have to help all of our teachers learn how to use these tools and how to use it in a way that will promote achievement for our students with autism, right? We also have a lot of the Captain members that work for Family Support Network and also work for Regional Center, and they work with their vendors to make sure that everyone is aware of what should we be doing, what practices have the evidence to support its use, right? And then the third goal is to increase interagency collaborations, right? We want to make sure that we work with everyone in the state of California so that everyone has access to all these wonderful resources, right? And to make sure there's a process for using these evidence-based practices. So throughout this presentation, we're going to share a lot of resources with you, and all of those resources are free. So if you're interested in learning about any one of these evidence-based practices, these resources are free for you to use. Okay.
Thanks, Monica. You know, as a parent, it's really important to me that you know, when you are doing your research, that you can find a place to look for these treatments and therapies that have been shown to be effective, because you know, you don't want to spend time on things that are not likely to be helpful for your child or family member. You want to really focus on things that have been shown to work. So I really appreciate the all the information on the Captain website. And by the way, I want to let everyone know that we'll share the Captain, some information from the Captain website. All the information is also available in Spanish on their website. So that's something that I think will be helpful to all of our attendees today. And we're going to share this presentation with everyone who registered by email, either later today or tomorrow. So some people asked about that. So you'll get it by email. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the first part of our presentation. What is autism? I think everybody here probably knows you know, what autism is, but in particular, I wanted to share some different definitions because the medical definition of autism has changed over the years. And it changed pretty significantly about 6 or 7 years ago. So the medical definition of autism is found in a big book that doctors have called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM. So DSM version 4 used to break down autism and some other conditions. You may have heard of Asperger's syndrome or pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, autism, and even something called Rett syndrome. And then several years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, a newer version of this manual came out, and the definition of autism, medical definition, changed quite a lot. So instead, they broke it, they took all those other diagnoses, autism, Asperger's syndrome, PDD, and they combined them all into something that they call autism spectrum disorder. And they specified 3 different levels of severity. The first level is someone who requires support. The second is requiring substantial support, so more support, and then requiring very substantial support. So there's some other things that change too, but notice, there's no more Asperger's syndrome as a diagnosis, but we know that some people who were previously diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome still identify with that as a diagnosis, and that's fine. But they've all been combined into autism spectrum disorder. And they call it a spectrum because it has a wide range of symptoms. If you've met a number of people, children or adults with autism, you know that they can have very significant differences in their levels of communication, of social interaction, behavior, and just independent skills. And that's why they call it a spectrum. So the actual criteria for the medical definition are having differences in social communication and social interactions. So that includes, our verbal communication, speaking, talking, but also nonverbal social communication, like understanding someone's facial expressions or understanding body language, social interactions, how you interact with someone else, getting close to them, or a lot of people focus on eye contact. So that's what they mean by social communication and social interactions. And also the second criteria is having restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. So you may have read, in the past that one common feature of autism in young children is that they like to line things up. So that's an example of a repetitive pattern of behavior in play, like lining up toys or cars or things, videos. I've known a lot of kids that have done that. But it can also be things like just always wanting to talk about one thing, always wanting to talk about dinosaurs, or having very restrictive interests, only interested in talking about, space or something like that, or other patterns of behavior, such as eating. A lot of individuals with autism have very restricted patterns of eating, what they'll eat, what texture, what color of the food, things like that. So these are all part of the criteria for autism, and it's different in every person. There can be many different patterns of behavior and different ways to communicate, but they all fall under this criteria for autism, or autism spectrum disorder. There are other conditions that are common for individuals with autism. They might be more likely to have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. That's quite common. Might are more likely to have attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, anxiety and mood swings. And a lot of individuals with autism are more likely to have episodes of seizures or epilepsy. And sometimes that doesn't start until someone kind of reaches the teen years. And gastrointestinal problems are also common. Digestive issues, reflux, Crohn's disease. So many of us know people who also have these conditions, and it's not part of the diagnosis of autism, but it's common and more common in people with autism. Now notice the medical definition of autism didn't say anything about intellectual ability, IQ. That's not part of the diagnosis, but there's a separate diagnosis of intellectual disability, and individuals with autism may also have an intellectual disability, but it's not part of the diagnosis of autism. And then it can be a little confusing because, you know, there's doctors or psychologists who can diagnose autism. There's also a separate criteria for regional center eligibility. If you have a family member who has autism, they might be a client of the regional center, and regional center has their own assessment and eligibility process that's separate from a medical definition. And then there's the educational definition. So if you have a child with an IEP, you'll notice it says for the IEP category, it says autistic-like. It doesn't actually say autism. That's because school districts don't do a medical diagnosis, but they look at the education, how it impacts a child's education. So regional center eligibility, I just took this from the DDS website. So in order for an individual to be eligible for regional center services with the diagnosis of autism or one of the other 4 categories, they have to have that diagnosis, autism, and it must be a substantial disability in 3 or more of these areas: communication, learning, self-care, mobility, self-direction, ability for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. So it's a little different than the medical diagnosis. And I think Malika is going to cover this part.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Malika Numan. I am also a program specialist, but I work out of our Santa Clarita Valley SELPA. So thank you for having me be here today. And I'm also a captain cadre member. So what this slide is representing is that with over the last decade, really, a little over that, since 2010, we have documentation of an increase in numbers of students who have autism, or students who identify as having autism. And so what this really is just showing you from the ages of 0 to 22, so from birth to 22, we have actually seen that we have more than 800,000 students, about 16% of our student population, that is identifying as having autism. And that is from our 2019 data, but it's coming from the California Department of Education. So it's just giving you an idea that this diagnosis is continually increasing within the state of California. Next slide. So similar to what Monica spoke about earlier, is that if you take into consideration there is such a large population of students who identify as having autism, you can only imagine that if you were to go online and look up perhaps autism treatment, you'll literally find a ridiculous amount of treatments available. I was going to ask you to guess, but we don't need to do that. If you look here, it's fine, it's no problem. But if you look here, there's over 200 million. Literally over 200 million autism treatments that you could at any moment find on Google, right? As of May 3rd, 2020. So when you heard Monica speaking about the importance of evidence-based practices, our next slide, the reason we are so big of, making sure that we're using evidence-based practices is because we know, one, there's so much information that's out there, but also many of the treatments for individuals with autism are treatments that, haven't really been scientifically proven. So you'll see our bottom one here. Many of the interventions may have no scientific evidence and have been recommended to support individuals. So that's concerning, right? Also looking here, the treatments for individuals with autism, they're so diverse. As you know, Victoria went over, there's so many different needs, there's so many different factors. It's important to make sure that we're using interventions that are really going to target, what our families and students need and require for support. And then lastly, here in the middle, we like to use a lot of fancy words in education, but this is basically saying that a lot of the treatments claim to range from amelioration, which I'm actually misspelling, or missaying, but basically that's a fancy word for saying things that are going to make a difference, things that can actually make an improvement, to recovery, right? So it's just giving you this idea that there's a lot of variety out there. There's a lot of different ideas. We are committed to making sure that our families are using the most efficient supports and treatments for students. So that's why we're going to talk a little bit more about evidence-based practices. So just giving brief definitions, when we say evidence-based practice, what we're talking about is an intervention or a practice where it has been scientifically based in research and it has demonstrated effectiveness for students. So this is not something we're guessing. We actually have research and examples of where these different strategies have been effective, and also the practices that we rely on, the process for determining that they are evidence-based is rigorous, is systematic, as well as objective procedures to deliver reliable results. So again, a lot of fancy jargon to say that people are spending time to make sure that they're not only practicing these different evidence-based practices in one school, but multiple schools. They're not practicing it with one individual, but multiple individuals. They're making sure that they're gathering research. They're looking at, is this effective? And not only effective for this one person, but for these multiple individuals here at various ages and levels, etc. Also, again, because we want to make sure we're using scientific research, and I want you to just be very clear as parents and family members, there are actually organizations that what they do is they study evidence-based practices, and they've done this for decades. And so one of those organizations is the National Clearinghouse for Autism Evidence and Practices. And again, they have their own definition, very similar. It's focused intervention practices that have evidence for efficiency and promoting positive outcomes for learners. So that's another thing. Our evidence-based practices have been proven to make a positive impact for our learners. And the next slide here, it's just giving you an overview of the different ways that we go about determining something is evidence-based. So one of those is having, again, 2+ groups where you have a design study. And again, these design studies are done within communities, organizations, schools, classrooms, homes. But again, there are studies that are conducted and you're looking at 2 different groups or more and comparing the research. We also have what we call the 5+ single case design, which is again this idea of using high quality single cases. And again, you're comparing them against different groups to see the effectiveness. And this is something that's done with at least 20 participants or more. And then you have the combination of evidence, which is a very common one, where again, you're looking at these kind of smaller groups and designs as well as larger amounts of people and putting that information together and comparing it. So that's just another example of the rigor. This is not some pie in the sky, something people are just pulling out of anywhere. They're really taking this information and comparing it across environments, across demographics, languages, countries, states, etc. So we're going to just really briefly talk about what are these evidence-based, because you keep hearing us say it, right? You might be thinking to yourself, well, what are they? What does it look like, right? So our next slide is just going to give you an overview of all of them. Okay, so again, we have things like prompting. I'm sure that's a common term that you've heard where people maybe say to you, oh, what type of prompts do you use with your child? Or these are the different prompting that we're going to use. That's evidence-based. Social narratives or social stories. If you have students who are in school, that may be a term that you're familiar with. Modeling, visual supports. We're constantly talking about visuals, schedules, images for students. So these things that you're hearing, these terms that you often hear in schools or maybe from your doctor or community organizations, et cetera, it's important for you to get, again, those are terms that have been proven. Self-management, when they're talking about helping a student be able to regulate their management, understand their body, how they're feeling, right? All of these things are a part of that evidence-based practice. And Captain has identified 28. And actually with our new slide, we have a total of 5 more, but there's still 28 total. But I just want you to see on the next slide, it highlights our newest ones, if you will, or the most recent. So you'll see for students who maybe are nonverbal, right? Or who don't communicate like everyone else. When you hear people speak about augmentative and alternate forms of communication, that is an evidence-based support that we provide. Sensory integration, music, and meditated intervention. All of these things are evidence-based that are being utilized with your students. So that's kind of really a comforting thing to know that there's so much thought that has gone into these different practices that we see on a day-to-day basis. And this here is a little bit difficult to see, but again, these are some of the wonderful resources on the Captain website. And again, you will have that link. But one of the things that we have for our families is this is actually a very cool diagram, if you will, that outlines here on the side. You'll see here to the right now, and unfortunately, I don't have a cursor here, but where it says antecedent-based intervention, that is a type of evidence-based practice. And the thing that's so great about it is, one, it gives you a definition. Thank you, Victoria. So it actually tells you arrangements of events preceding the interfering behavior, and again, the reduce of the occurrence. A lot of fancy words, but it's basically telling you this is a process that we use to look at student behavior. But the best part of this kind of outline here is if you're looking at the colors here, you actually can see where this specific ABI, evidence-based practice, is beneficial for students. So you'll see at the top, it shows you it's utilized in social situations. And then you'll see the colors. 0 to 5 is identified in green. So for students who are from ages 0 to 5, they would benefit from using this evidence-based practice within a social setting. That's what this is telling you. If you have students who are older, so let's say 6 to 14, they're identified in the yellow. So not only for social situations, but also behavior support, or with play or school readiness, academics, you'll see the titles across. It lets you know specifically where each of these evidence-based practices have been proven to be most effective for students, the area where it's most effective, as well as the age group. So again, as a parent or family member, this is a wonderful resource because, again, let's say you are at IEP, or maybe someone's talking to you about an evidence-based practice and you want to just kind of have a little bit more of like, where is this useful? Or maybe there's an area for you at home or at school where you'd like to see your child improve and you kind of want to have some input about different types of strategies you'd like to learn about or maybe see could be effective for your child. Different resources like this, again, located on the Captain website, would make that conversation available for you and actually have supports be provided where you can have a greater understanding and an in-depth understanding of how these specific evidence-based practices can support your child. Next slide. And next, again, we talked a lot about the Captain website. So on the Captain website, we actually have what we call evidence-based practice matrix. This is a very wonderful resource because there are trainings there. There are the grids like you've just seen that are located there. There are videos that are available for families to be able to see. And actually, I see the link was just put down in the chat. So if you want, you can click on that. But this is just an example where you would go to the Captain resources, and there's a whole list and host of materials for you to look through. And again, as Victoria mentioned, they're both in English and Spanish. And the next here, this is a really cute slide, but I think it's really important for us to remember is that when we're talking about the use of evidence-based practices, there's 3 things that we want to keep in mind. One, the most important part is that once we determine what evidence-based practice we're going to use, we want to make sure that it's implemented with fidelity. And fidelity is basically a word of saying we want to make sure we're doing it consistently. We want to make sure that we're doing it the way it was designed. So if there are, for example, we're talking about using visual supports for a student, and we want to help a child with being able to perhaps access the world around them using visual supports, we want to make sure that we're doing that across environments. So that should happen at school, at dinner time, during cleanup time, as we're getting ready in the morning. That's what we mean by fidelity, using it on a consistent basis under the appropriate environments, and then also collecting the appropriate data so that we know for sure that this support is actually helping our children. So that's one. Two, we want to understand that every evidence-based practice is not necessarily designed or appropriate for every learner. Okay, so there are 28 to choose from. Every single one is not going to necessarily be a positive or appropriate fit for every student. So we just want to keep that in mind, because again, as we select these different supports, we're constantly collecting data, which is again, information to see is it effective or not, so that we can also go back to the drawing board, go back to our teams, our communities, and perhaps have a conversation about another approach that would be more effective. And then lastly, our evidence-based practices are most effective when they are carefully matched to the learner's specific needs, goals, and unique characteristics. And another way of saying that is everything that we do needs to be student-centered, person-centered, right? So we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind who our students are, what their goals are, what their strengths are, areas where we want to see them build independence. All of those things should be guiding our choice when we decide what evidence-based practices that we are selecting, so that we're selecting practices that are going to, again, be most beneficial for those individuals. And it's just a cute little saying, unless you're using evidence-based practices, I can't hear a word you're saying, which is basically, hey, if we're not coming from a place of using practices that we know are supporting our children and having them be successful, we're not interested, because we're here for the long haul and success for everyone, right? That's it.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Newman. My turn. My name is Ashley Albrecht. I work at Castaic High School for the Hart District. I'm the Special Education Department Chair. I'm also a Captain Cadre member for the Santa Clarita Valley SELPA. And I teach a social emotional wellness class called Yes, I Can. And we are all about celebrating autism, specifically Autism Awareness Month. So I'm happy to be here. We've done so many school activities already. So we're going to focus on 3 evidence-based practices that we've seen as educators that align with what could be used for home interventions as well. So the top 3 that we just chose, again, there's 28 that Dr. Newman mentioned. So the 3 we have are social narratives, visual supports, and technology-aided instruction and intervention. So now I will break down all 3. So social narratives can be visually represented for all ages. So I think on this example, you're going to see a social narrative of a person that wants to play with a different child, whether this is at recess or something going on in the classroom. So when we're saying ask to play, this could be done even at home when students are trying to play when they get home from school, you name it. So when we have sometimes my friends are playing a game without me, that's one card. And then the next card says, I want to play too, but I shouldn't just go and start playing. So typically students on the spectrum or children on the spectrum have a hard time with knowing when to ask or how to ask to play in a group. So these different visual cards and visual cues can now show the child how to do this. And we do this at school in the classroom as well with different things. So as teacher, if I know that the student is trying to work on social skills at home, we can then develop it at home and be consistent, have fidelity, just like Dr. Newman was talking about. So through these cards, children are able to now see, what can I do next? How can I ask? What should I say? So social narratives are literally a story that a child can follow. And we can do them like real stories, real situations, or even make them fun in regards to skills with communication, problem solving, decision making, self-management, socializing, generalizing, This could even be going on a plane ride for the first time and talking about what that's going to be like, because a plane can be pretty scary to a child on the spectrum, or even just going from the bus to the classroom or from the home to the bus stop, things like that. They find this very fun because a lot of times you're able to make these on your own or with a parent, just based on how creative you want to be. And they could be written in the individual's language and learning level using first or second person narrative. So we even design these with our students labeled as English language learners in their primary language and English, just to kind of have fun and hone in on literacy skills as well. And 2 to 5 sentences that describe for every 1 sentence that it directs. So they're meant to be very simple, concrete. They're not meant to be essays. Really depending on the age. I know I work with high schoolers, so sometimes they can be pretty creative and long if the students are trying to make it fun. So we allow students to implement their own personalities as needed based on what works for them. And they could do this at home as well. This is just a cute little example of a kid who's driving the same way to his friend's house, and the kiddo being really consistent and wanting the same path all the time. But that's not necessarily going to happen. So sometimes behaviors can happen when a parent decides to take a different path because of traffic or what have you. So this is an example of a child saying, sometimes we need to go a different route. I don't like new routes, but I will still get to my friend's house, just a different way. So we're able to see, and again, they can even choose their own picture if they want to. And this makes it a lot of fun at home. That's great, Victoria. Thank you for sharing. I'm glad that you've seen this be successful at home. And a social autopsy, just kind of, it's an assessment that lets us know what socially we can focus on. So we can do this on school-based or at home, but we're providing all of these criteria. So we're identifying the error, we're determining who is harmed by the error, meaning socially, deciding how to correct the error, and developing a plan so the error does not happen again. So the goal of the social autopsy is twofold. We're trying to help the individual better understand a social situation and assist the individual in responding more effectively when similar situations are encountered again. So getting in better habits and getting as really refined with these skills so that we can be as successful as possible in the community. So here's just, again, different types of social narratives that you might see. So we can do them as a story, as a comic strip, as a cartoon, power cards, again, through social autopsies. There's different apps. So this also goes along with technology, and we'll talk about that in a moment. That's also an evidence-based practice. And websites. So it's very creative all across the board. I know Monica and with her team before, they've laminated these. They've handed them out to teachers just to make them consistent. And again, whatever we try to do at school, we try to do at home. So try to follow the same path and talk to caseload managers as needed so that we can really work with you. So the next one is visual support. And this is one that we use typical as adults all the time. If you think of visual supports, I know I'm in my classroom right now, but the schedule on the board is for me. I think I use it more than students do. I want to know what time it is. I want to know what class I'm going to teach. I think even we use calendars on our phones. Like as adults, I think we really use this all the time. And when students are on the spectrum, we really need to support them visually as much as possible, again, to enable them to be successful independently based on their ability. So if they see a visual support, they're able to keep track of daily activities and develop an understanding of time and sequences through a picture. So they might include, but are not limited to, pictures, written words, gestures, objects within the environment, arrangement of the environment or visual boundaries, schedules, maps, labels, organization systems, timelines, and scripts. So when we go to the next slide, we'll see some specific examples that I can hone in on here. So at home, for example, if the student's trying to figure out if it's snack time or not, on the bottom left-hand corner, Thank you. Yeah, if you want to point to that, is a little stack of cards where you can tell your child, all right, it's snack time. Then it's TV time. So it's like a ring of cards that you can turn each time. There's a first then, so also on the bottom right. So first, even if it's brushing teeth, first we're going to turn on the water. Then we're going to like a step-by-step scenario. We could even implement rewards through every step. So if a younger child's having trouble with brushing their teeth and remembering the steps, we could reward each step that they're doing correctly. It could even be as an all the way up to an older student who's having trouble completing homework at home or self-advocacy and they need support asking for help. It could be a breakdown of specifically what we can do through each step. So there's tape for boundaries, meaning if a student is having a behavior and they escape an environment for whatever reason, we could say, this is your relax corner, this is your break corner, and there could be tape around it. Even if we're in a home specifically and you want them to go to a certain location for different things, like a game room or homework space, tape for boundaries really, really works, and it gets children in the zone for where they need to be at that moment. Photographs is really great because you can literally take a picture of the student doing this correctly or a different student or a favorite character that they might have, like Sesame Street character or all the way up to high school, like Big Bang Theory, actual pictures of somebody doing a correct activity and how you want them to do it so they can then recreate that. Phrases or sentences, literally just based on the ability level, a step-by-step. I know at school we use a lot of planners for the students to let them know where they need to go next and the homework assignments that they have, or even how to study for a test. Great. And thank you for your explanation here as well, Victoria. I know you have a lot of experience. It's great. Oh, Postit Notes is a good one. That's what Victoria mentioned in the chat. Postit Notes are so simple, but they work. They really, really work. So visual schedule is a visual representation of what is going to happen throughout the day or within a task. And they are helpful for breaking down a task that has multiple steps to ensure the teaching and compliance of those steps. It is also helpful in decreasing anxiety and rigidity surrounding transitions by communicating when certain activities will occur throughout the day, because as we know, transitions, for the most part, are very difficult for kiddos on the spectrum. All right, we can go to the next slide. So we suggest when we're creating a visual schedule, and again, this could be in the classroom or at home, so getting creative with ways to make these as similar as possible. But we're putting the visuals in a place where you know the student will see them, or they can even be portable or hung on a wall in home that is visible at all times. So portable meaning if it's something that we can laminate and have a card that the kid can take with them everywhere, or they could take it to school to remind them of certain things, like almost like affirmations that they could take with them. And this is something they could put in a notebook or in their backpack, just based on what the visual support is. And we need to make sure that the child should be able to see the schedule before beginning the first activity. They might even need a prompt, such as a verbal prompt saying, where's your visual schedule? Or maybe pointing to the visual schedule or the area where you know they keep it. And when it's time for the activity on the schedule to occur, cue the child with a brief verbal instruction. So not only telling them where the schedule is, but what's next, and prompting them through the steps as needed until they're ready to be independent. We can use a lot of prompting at first and then fade out the prompting as needed, again, to get them to be independent, because that is the whole point of evidence-based practices. And when a task is complete, I suggest definitely using positive reinforcement, because that's huge, definitely, especially as we're learning a new skill, and then cueing them to check the schedule again. And the last one I will talk about is the technology-aided instruction and intervention. So technology is used all the time, especially the last couple of years. I think we all know what Zoom is now, and we've utilized various paths to communicate with each other. And so our students on the spectrum, it's very central feature of an intervention. It's any electronic item, equipment, application, or virtual network that is used intentionally to increase, maintain, and/or improve daily living, work productivity, and recreation or leisure capabilities of adolescents with autism spectrum disorder. This also works for younger children as well. So I'll get into some specific examples coming up here. What we really need to make sure is that we're taking baseline data as far as what the tech gadget will work best for each student. So when we're taking data, we're trying to see what's going on, whether the behavior is happening or a student isn't being successful with something. A baseline is showing us initially what's going on and how we can then intervene. So we're giving ample opportunities and trainings and collecting data, whether again, it's at school or at home, and aligning the two as much as possible. So at school, we use Chromebooks. I know at my school specifically, every student has a Chromebook in all classrooms that they're able to use for each class. They can increase productivity and motivation for students who struggle with handwriting skills, executive functioning, focusing skills. And what's really great is we're able to use all types of apps on these Chromebooks. So even if students are struggling with grammar or focusing in general, there's apps and reminders of things that will come up and remind them of different things that they should be on. So Google Classroom is what us teachers use to keep students on track and to submit assignments through. Students that really struggle with executive functioning, it makes it super easy to just see what they need to do and turn it in. So obviously it's visual support as well. It's just through technology. And then a lot of teachers use Class Dojo. So parents, this might look really familiar. This is really popular for elementary teachers. So Class Dojo is an app that teachers use to provide positive behavior support in the classroom, but it also notifies parents and they get points and there's cool characters involved. And I know parents, my brother does this with his own kiddo. Once they get points in the classroom, then they get rewards at home too. So that's a really cool way to engage with positive behavior and trying to have the students make really good choices when they're at school, and you can do this at home. So there's apps at home that are very similar to this that you can use. And even if we'll get to some more specific examples momentarily, but if your child's doing something you would like them to do at home correctly or cleaning up even correctly, then you can give them a reward through an app or track points and data through an app. Thank you, Maria, for sharing your comment as well. Nice. I'm glad you found it successful. So here's just a ton of apps that I know we'll send you this and you can kind of explore as needed. Their assistive technology is what some students use who are nonverbal and on the spectrum. So where it says Dynavox, there's all kinds of, we had an assistive tech meeting the other day and I lost count of how many gadgets there are nowadays for students to really communicate with and children at home, where you could even say, like, if they want to go to a store, they could even program the apps to have their favorite stores on it now. And I'm just blown away by technology nowadays. It's really, really successful, and it really enables students to, again, function at their highest capability as independently as possible. Even though they're using a gadget, they're using it on their own. And it might take some time to get trained on these different apps, but they will learn quicker than the adults will. So they've pretty much been born with technology in their hands nowadays. So this is a really, really popular evidence-based practice and a very successful one. So what's even better is, as I mentioned, social stories and visual schedules earlier, we can put these on apps. So it's like we're embedding all kinds of evidence-based practices all at once. So we can do conversation prompts through the app, homework support, independence tracking, emotional support, positive behavior support. The list goes on and on. On the right side, there's a Choice Works app. And this one I found very successful in the classroom. And then when I used to be a behavioral therapist, we use this as well in home. So when the student or child is feeling a certain way, It gives options of appropriate ways to react. It actually sometimes will even give an inappropriate way to react. And the student is supposed to choose the appropriate one as a reminder of a self-soothing method they could use at that moment, rather than going into a negative behavior. So it'll walk a student through what to do, or even how to use transportation and all kinds of things in the community as students get older. That's it for me.
Okay, well, thank you, Ashley. That was a really good roundup of a lot of different apps. And you're right, there are so many and probably new ones all the time. So it was great for you to share some that you're familiar with, both in the classroom and that parents can use at home. I also want to share that there's an organization called TASK, TASK, and they have sort of a specialty in assistive technology and apps. So, right, thank you, Maria, for putting that in the chat. TASK has some really great workshops on apps that you can use. And they have some videos recorded on their YouTube page, so you can go look at them. But they're a great resource for apps for education and behavior, communication. There's so many great things. So I think this is a good time to get some questions or comments from the people here on our webinar. And just a reminder, you can either raise your hand and then we can, open your microphone and you can ask your question. Or if you prefer to, you can type something in, either the Q&A or the chat. And, you have a classroom teacher here who is a great resource, as well as educators who, know a lot about all these different evidence-based practices. So I think this is a great opportunity to ask some questions. I'm going to check to see if anyone's raised their hand. I have to see. I don't see anyone yet. Oh wait, we do.
Would it be all right for us to add our email addresses in the chat, just in case someone thinks of some
That's a great
questions?
Yes. I'm going to, Maria Ariano has a question. Do you want to ask your question, Maria?
Sí, claro que sí. Un momento, nada más que tengo un poquito de problema con el internet.
Yes, just a moment. I'm having a little bit of trouble with the internet. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Mi pregunta es, por ejemplo, ¿cuál es la recomendación o cuál sería?
For example, what is the recommendation, or what would be the precise recommendation when, for example, your son is having difficulty, sensory difficulties, especially much more accentuated right now during the pandemic with all these, with the distance learning and the whole situation? What would be, for example, in my daughter's case, she's been very affected by this situation. It affected her emotional state a lot, especially in the past. She had a lot of sensory problems, but over time with therapies, she started to diminish them. She would sit in circles, and but during this time of the pandemic, all these things started occurring again. She would self-stimulate by flapping her hands and rocking her chair. And the second evaluation that I've asked for with the district, but I don't know. I don't know how they can focus her attention and so that they can do an evaluation. How can they do an evaluation focused on a sensory issue? Because it's like they don't give it much importance and how to give that support and that these resources once they've done this evaluation. I don't know if they're requiring more training or if they need to be more aware of the situation or how our children have been affected or how to focus these evaluations. I would like you to give me your point of view. How can they focus these evaluations? What would be the most appropriate words to ask for this type of evaluation and that it be a productive evaluation so that it can help in this aspect, in this situation that's affecting my son? Because in the past, with therapies, he got a lot better, but then during the pandemic, all of this came back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Does anyone want to take a first attempt at answering Maria's question with your point of view?
Someone interpret what she said?
I was interpreting. Did you, were you not able to hear me?
I heard you.
Okay.
I can,
Sorry to
I'll just-
interrupt. I think
Go
it's
ahead.
Monica, just so you know, on the interpretation down where it says English,
Uh-huh.
we have to make sure that we're on English so that when individuals are speaking in Spanish, we can hear the interpreter interpreting
wonderful.
English.
Thank
It's
you.
just,
I'm
yeah, that's
sorry I
all.
missed
No, no
that.
problem. I just wanted to clarify that. And Ashley, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Don't worry. So Carmen Lickscheidel actually translated it for us, but I definitely got the gist of it. So it's saying that her question is, what is recommended? The recommendation, the most precise recommendation when your child is having sensory difficulties, especially more accentuated during the pandemic. So her daughter has been much more affected emotionally through this time. With therapy, she started to decrease some of the symptoms. But during the pandemic, those symptoms started to get back, moving her arms in circles. And this is the second evaluation I asked with the district, but I don't know how they can focus their attention to sensory situations. And it doesn't seem like they give the same importance once giving the same instruction. So are they up to date on how to focus on these types of evaluations? And what are the appropriate words to help our children during these times? So yes, I got the gist of what you were asking in regards to the pandemic really affecting children all across the board, adults as well, and especially kiddos on the spectrum. So thank you, Carmen, for translating that. But as far as in the pandemic, I think what I really benefited from is being honest with like how this is affecting everybody. And as far as in LAUSD, Malika, do you know of any specific what they're using for in that district by chance?
So it's a very complex. One thing I think it's important to remember is that schools, districts, areas within, because I used to work in LAUSD for 10 years, each area uses different things. So I think that that's just one thing that's important. So one thing pointer I would start off with is being able to go to your child's case manager perhaps or an administrator and asking what are the specific tools or curriculums or resources they are currently using to support students through social emotional needs, sensory needs. If they are not able to answer specifically for the sensory, meaning an administrator or a case manager, you may want to talk to an occupational therapist if your child has an occupational therapist on their IEP or the physical therapist, because those are the experts who would probably be most well-versed within that IEP team to provide you with feedback. So first, I think the first step is being equipped to ask those questions to the appropriate professionals. That would be one. Two, I think it's important to get no specific school or district or area operates the same. And there are many reasons for that I can't, possibly name all in this one area or time. So I think the first starting point is to know who to ask. And then in regards to what to say, I would try to give as much feedback and data that you can about what you're observing now after the pandemic. So for example, how you talked about your child and her body and like the filling of the arms, like where you're seeing that regression. And then being able to specify what it looked like prior to it, right? And if there are some specific strategies that you remember doing, because typically to see such an improvement, I'm sure there was something you were doing home to school or vice versa, maybe being able to speak about what those resources were initially and perhaps the supports that you had, so that we can start to find out what was effective and how to continue to build on those supports. The other thing that I'll say, just having full transparency, is, nationwide, we're having shortage in terms of educators, specialists, supports, not as an excuse, okay? And I'm not trying to justify the divide or the regression that we've seen, but I do want to be very honest of there has been a shortage. And so the impact of that is that even though we now have students coming back to school and we are coming in and we have specialists who are doing evaluations and all of these different things to try and, close that gap, it takes time. Some places are new people. It may not have been the original people who were doing those assessments. In some cases, we have to outsource to different agencies, and those individuals don't necessarily have the same expertise or experiences as those people prior to the COVID pandemic. So I say all that to say too, I think another key thing here is having some grace and really keeping lines of communication open, but also having grace and a bit of empathy for schools. We're basically flying planes and building them all at one time as we're coming back from the COVID pandemic. And it has an impact not only on our families and our students, which is most important, but also the staff, and trying to kind of get their footing and come back and reestablish practices that are going to help our students grow and develop. So unfortunately, that's not maybe necessarily as specific as you would like, but it is me trying to be as authentic as possible about the fact that there's not a one size fits all answer. Especially, I'm not in that district, I'm not in that area, I don't necessarily know how they operate, but I will just reiterate again, being clear about the regression. So being able to be specific about what you're seeing now after the pandemic versus what your child could do before, having clarity around who you can go to at the school sites to get information about either sensory supports that they have for students, social emotional well-being supports that they have for students, and getting some clarity about what that looks like and who the person would be to contact to find out more information about how you can understand what they're doing in the school, but also how you can incorporate those things at home.
Yeah, and I like how someone mentioned ABA therapy. Yeah, that's definitely a really good tool at home and at school. And then Monica, did you see the question regarding speech in Antelope Valley?
I did. And what I would say is I'm not really familiar outside of our school districts of what services are offered within the community. However, I know Family Focused Resource Center and Regional Center probably has a list of other vendors and speech pathologists that would work outside of the school districts. So, and if that's how I understood the question, I would say, unfortunately, I don't know of any vendors in the Antelope Valley per se that I would be able to recommend, but hopefully, oh, look, I see Victoria already shared dynamic therapy solutions. And then also, we had talked about, Malika had shared earlier about the EBP report, and I'm just going to put that in the chat here, a link to it. And it's the NPDC. It's a very long report, but if you just are curious to see if something that you're doing like ABA or discrete trial training, if any of that actually is evidence-based practices and you want to see a bigger form and really see all the research, I threw the whole entire PDF report into the chat. So feel free to take a look at it. It is really long and there's a lot of research in there, but you know, you could scroll to the colored pages that have really all of the pertinent information on there.
Mhm. And I wanted to suggest something to Maria also. You know, as a parent, I always try to, you know, try to get as much help for my children as possible. And I noticed on this list of the evidence-based therapies, or practices, not therapies, one of the things listed was exercise. And I know that's always been very helpful for my kids to help with anxiety and sensory issues. And that's something that we can do, you know, at home before school or after school, and do together, you know, with your family. Something as simple as taking a walk or taking a hike in the evening. You know, I used to like to go out and take a walk with my kids before dinner, and it really did have a calming effect on my kids. So, you know, just one of those things that if you can build it into your everyday life, it's helpful for everybody. I know it's helpful for me to help relieve stress and anxiety. So it might be helpful for your daughter as well. And I know too that the pandemic has been really hard on all of our kids. One of my children has had a really difficult time, a lot of anxiety and so on. And I'm glad that he's back to his regular activities, but he's still struggling a little bit. So I know a little bit about what you're feeling too, Maria.
I think when it comes to behaviors in general, behaviors are a function of communication. So like what Dr. Newman was saying with data, that is so crucial and critical, trying to figure out what the child's trying to communicate, whether it's in the classroom or at home. So yeah, great question. I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out.
Yeah, really. Okay, and Scarlett asked about, I think she asked about the speech. And I think I provided one resource about that in Antelope Valley. And I can look into some other ones too, Scarlett, and you can call our Antelope Valley office with some other questions. We did want to share.
Would you be able to put the phone number for the Antelope Valley
Oh, sure.
the Family Focus Resource Center? Just
yeah, that's a good
call
office. So
and ask
I'll
tomorrow.
write that down. Lancaster.
And while Victoria is just documenting that, I'll just say really quickly about the references. This is just a place to let you know, again, these slides, this information wasn't just pulled out the sky. You know, we didn't just come together and go, you know what, let's throw this on here and share that with the families. We actually have all of this from documented evidence, if you will, strategies, research out there in the world. So one of those is the National Professional Development Center of Autism Spectrum Disorders. You'll also see the website there. So when you have these sites, if you like to go and visit, look at things in more detail, as Monica talked about, you're able to do that. Again, you'll see that we use a different slide that has been used within our captain training. And again, you can have access to that slide, those slides and those informations by going to the captain website, which is also the next resource that's there. So that's the direct captain website. And again, going there are resources, there are trainings that we have, there are modules actually, which is the coolest part. There are these actual modules where you're able to sign up for free. There's no charge to you, and you can actually look and view these modules that will provide you with more in-depth training around evidence-based practices. So again, some of you who have mentioned about things that you're seeing at home, or wanting to have more support for your children, you know, this is a wonderful resource to educate yourself, but also to share to your IEP teams, because, you know, are those people who are supporting, hey, you know, I just went to this meeting and I learned about this Captain resource. Have you heard about that? Perhaps this is something that we can look at. Again, you can also reach out to myself, Monica. You know, if there are people in our SELPAs, we are more than happy to go to the schools, work with them, speak with them, and provide support. And then lastly, you'll see the autism internet modules, and there's a specific, again, a link so that you can see where this information is coming from. So it's a great way to just educate yourself about what's available.
And I would actually also just like to clarify that the autism internet modules there are some modules, but an actual even better website is the Affirm modules.
Mhm.
And I put that in the link there. And I would definitely suggest to take a look at the Affirm modules before you take a look at the autism internet modules. The Affirm modules are updated very often. And you can also get a certificate. So let's say if you need any hours, or even as a parent, or if you're in school or anything, you can print the certificate after you completed the class. And again, it's free. It's free. So if you're like, I want to know more about ABA and what's happening during therapy, or my therapist is using visual supports, how can I do this at home? Well, you can go on the website again that we're going to share with you here. Again, the Affirm modules, and it will, it'll take you to the different modules, and it's class step by step, and you can print out anything you would need. And if you're interested in, there's videos, and if you're interested in doing it at home, there's everything here that you would need in order to learn how to really implement these practices at home. So, again, if you also know of any other parents that are struggling with figuring out what to do in the home with their kids who are on the spectrum, or you're working with other providers or babysitters or anyone that really needs this information, this is accessible to anyone within the world, right? This is free information. And so we really would advocate for everyone who works with kids with autism to take a look at this website and play around with it.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks for all those great links. I want to wrap up by sharing a couple other resources. The first I want to mention is a plug for my organization, because we're parents like a lot of you on this webinar. So one of the things that we do is we have support groups. I have always found support from other parents to be really valuable. The emotional support and also sharing of resources. So if you have not attended a support group, or if you'd like to, please check out our calendar of events. I'm going to put it in the chat. We have 10 different support groups every month. Some are in English, some are in Spanish. We also have a lot of workshops just like this every month, some in English, some in Spanish. So what's coming up? We are having a workshop next Tuesday about, this is kind of an interesting topic, about sexual development in individuals with developmental disabilities. That's going to be in English next Tuesday. We had it in Spanish a couple weeks ago, and that's going to be on our YouTube page soon. And then in June, we have a couple of workshops about helping your child get to sleep. That was one of those things that we said is common in individuals with autism, difficulty sleeping. So that's coming in June. And well, there's a lot of things. I can't think of them all right now, but I did put the link there. So please check out our website. And we talked a little bit about the regional center. If you live in the San Fernando Valley, Santa Clarita Valley, or Antelope Valley, and you have a family member with autism, they might be a client of the North LA County Regional Center, or you might still want to apply for those services. So that's a resource that I would share with you. And for people that are looking for a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis of autism, 2 centers in the Los Angeles area are the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment And also Children's Hospital of Los Angeles has a clinic called the Boone Fetter Clinic. So those are two resources that we share. That I think is everything we have for today. And I really want to thank our presenters, Monica, Ashley, and Malika, for sharing your knowledge with us today about evidence-based practices. This is important for all of us, I think, because there's so much information out there, and it's hard to know, where to look and what really works. So that's what we wanted to share with you today, which treatments can really help our loved ones with autism. And this has been so helpful. So thank you all. And thanks all of you for being here on our training today. And as I said, I'll be sending out an email to everybody later that has this presentation. And I'll also include the links to the Captain website, including all the information in Spanish. All right. So thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. It's great to see you. Thank you, Shelley, our interpreter, for always doing a great job for us. We appreciate it. And happy Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. And we will see you again. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Hi, thank
Thanks.
you.